First Officer Zixtal had always prided himself on running a tight ship. In 15 cycles of cargo hauling across the Orion Arm, he'd never lost a single container, never missed a deadline, and never, not once, had an incident worth reporting to the Galactic Transport Authority. The stellar winds was his home, his pride, and his legacy. At least it was until today. Confirm cargo parameters. He chittered nervously to his terminal, compound eyes reflecting the soft blue glow of the holoscreen. The manifest flickered before him. 1 stasis pod, priority clearance, ultra-secure classification. Simple enough on paper. The pod contained a single human, supposedly a high-risk prisoner being transferred to the maximum security facility on Proxima II. The payment for this job had been astronomical. Enough to retire on, if he was being honest. But something about it had felt off from the start. The loading crew had been human military types, not the usual correctional officers. They'd insisted on using their own stasis tech rather than standard Galactic Authority equipment. And their instructions had been oddly specific. Maintain exactly 18 degrees Celsius in the cargo bay, no scanning equipment of any kind, and absolutely no attempts to communicate with the prisoner. A sharp buzz from his console yanked him from his thoughts. The temperature in Cargo Bay 3 had just spiked by 2 degrees. Computer, status report on stasis pod power systems, Zixtal ordered, mandibles clicking anxiously. Stasis pod maintaining nominal function, no anomalies detected. He was about to breathe a sigh of relief when another alert flashed across his screen. Motion detected in Cargo Bay 3. That was impossible. The bay was sealed, and the human should be in deep stasis for another 5 hours at least. Security feed, Cargo Bay 3, he commanded. The screen remained dark. Computer, explain lack of visual. Camera systems in Cargo Bay 3 are offline. Time of failure, 3 minutes ago. Zixtal felt his hemolymph run cold. With trembling appendages, he opened a channel to the bridge. Captain Nexexi, we have a situation. Explain, came the curt reply. The human. I believe it's awake. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for eternity. Finally, the captain spoke, her voice unnaturally calm. Seal all bulkheads between Cargo Bay 3 and critical ship systems. Initiate emergency protocols. And Zixtal. Yes, Captain. What exactly did the humans tell us about this prisoner? Zixtal pulled up the transport documents, scanning them quickly. His antennae went rigid as he noticed something for the first time. They never actually used the word prisoner, Captain. They said asset over and over. They called it a valuable asset. A loud clang echoed through the ship's hull, followed by the distinct sound of pressurized seals disengaging. The emergency bulkheads weren't closing. Captain, Zixtal's voice cracked. I'm reading manual overrides on all security systems between Cargo Bay 3 and engineering. Someone's bypassing them. But that's impossible. The override codes are encrypted with quantum. Impossible for anyone but a human military AI specialist. A new voice cut in over the comm system. The voice was calm, almost friendly, with a slight feminine lilt. Which is exactly what I am. Sorry about the deception, but we needed to get aboard without raising alerts. Zixtal's antennae pressed flat against his head. Who? What are you? Commander Sarah Chen, Special Operations Division, Earth Defense Force. And your ship is carrying something far more dangerous than me. You just don't know it yet. The captain's voice cut back in, sharp with anger. Our vessel has been certified clean by 3 separate Galactic Authority inspections. Whatever game you're playing, those inspections can't detect what we're looking for, Commander Chen interrupted. The parasites evolved specifically to bypass standard scanning protocols. That's why they've spread so far, so fast. We've been tracking this particular cluster for weeks, trying to catch them before they reach the Proxima colony. Your ship was their perfect vector. Regular route, trusted crew, minimal security overhead. Zixtal's mind raced. Parasites. But we haven't taken on any biological cargo in months, just standard supplies and... He stopped, mandibles clicking as realization hit. The grain shipment from Epsilon Ia. Bingo. Chen's voice held a note of approval. They've nested in your ventilation system, feeding on the trace organic particles. In about 6 hours, they'll reach maturity and start spreading spores. Every ship that docks at Proxima Ii would be infected within days. Millions could die before anyone realized what was happening. Why should we believe you? The captain demanded. This could all be a trick, a human plot toe. Another clang rang through the ship, this one followed by a high-pitched keening that made Zixtel's carapace vibrate uncomfortably. The sound seemed to be coming from inside the walls themselves. That, Chen said grimly, is what a nest sounds like when it starts to breach containment. Those walls are crawling with them now. You can't see them yet because they're still translucent, but they're there, and they're hungry. Zixtel watched in horror as tiny movements began to ripple across the surface of his console, like heat waves on metal. Except the movements were getting more pronounced, more purposeful. I can help you, Chen continued, but we need to work fast, and you need to trust me. Otherwise, this ship becomes a tomb in about 5 hours and 53 minutes. Your choice, Captain. What's it going to be? The captain was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was tight with controlled fear. What do you need us to do? First, we need to get to engineering. I have a plan, but it's going to sound crazy, even by human standards. Chen paused, and Zixtel could have sworn he heard amusement in her voice. How do you feel about turning your cargo hold into a makeshift pressure cooker? As Zixtel hurried to comply with the first of what would surely be many bizarre human instructions, he couldn't help but wonder if this was going to be the kind of story no one in the Galactic Transport Authority would ever believe. Assuming, of course, they lived long enough to tell it. Commander Sarah Chen moved through the Stellar Winds maintenance tunnels with practiced efficiency, her polymer combat suit allowing her to slide through spaces that would have been tight even for the insectoid crew. The ship's schematics she'd memorized hadn't mentioned the coating of translucent biological material, now covering every surface, a detail that would have been nice to know before she'd started this mission. Your ventilation system is completely compromised, she reported through her suit's comm unit. The parasites are using it as a transit network. Smart little bastards. Impossible, Captain Nexix's voice crackled back. Our atmospheric processors have triple redundant filters rated for particles down to 2 microns. Chen finished. But these aren't particles. They're engineered. Someone designed them specifically to exploit standard ship safety systems. She paused at a junction, examining the way the biological growth pulsed slightly in the dim emergency lighting. The real question is who and why. First Officer Zixtel's nervous chittering came through the channel. Engineered. But that would mean someone's waging biological warfare, Chen confirmed grimly. And they're using civilian shipping lanes to do it. She pulled a small device from her belt. It looked almost like a child's toy, a clear cylinder filled with swirling lights. The parasites recoiled from it slightly. What is that device? Nexixi demanded. Something we cooked up after the first outbreak. The parasites operate on a quantum level. That's how they bypass normal sensors. This generates a localized field that forces them to maintain a single quantum state, makes them visible, and more importantly, vulnerable. She attached the device to the wall. I'm setting up a containment grid. Should slow their spread, give us time to implement the main plan. About this plan, Zixtel ventured nervously, converting our cargo hold into a, what did you call it? Pressure cooker, Chen said, moving to the next junction. These things are tough, but they have 2 weaknesses, extreme pressure and extreme heat. Hit them with both at once, they pop like soap bubbles. The trick is generating enough of both to hit all of them at once, because if even a few survive, they'll adapt, Nexixi finished. Like all engineered organisms. Quick study, Captain, that's why we need your engine core. Most ship reactors wouldn't be able to generate the kind of energy we need, but a Helios-class cargo hauler like yours, she's got power to spare. Chen reached another junction and froze. Well, that's not good. What? Both aliens asked simultaneously. They're learning faster than the models predicted. The growth patterns are changing. They're starting to form structures. Chen examined the biological material more closely. What had been a simple coating was now developing distinct layers, with what looked disturbingly like neural pathways running between them. What kind of structures? Zixtal asked, though his tone suggested he didn't really want to know. The kind that think, Chen replied grimly. Captain, we need to move faster. How's the evacuation of the lower decks coming? All crew are cleared from sections 12 through 18. But Commander, our engineers are reporting strange readings from the reactor core. The containment field is fluctuating. Chen swore under her breath. They're not just learning. They're actively attacking your systems. The parasites must recognize the threat. She started moving faster through the tunnels. Listen carefully. I need you to vent atmosphere from all compromised sections except engineering. The cold and vacuum won't kill them, but it'll slow them down. That's nearly half the ship, HFY protested. Better half the ship than all of it. Do it now, Captain. Authorization, Chen 709 Echo. There was a pause, then the sound of rushing air filled the tunnels as emergency protocols engaged. Chen's suit automatically compensated for the pressure drop, but she could see the parasitic growth writhing in apparent distress. It's working, Zixtal reported. Reactor readings are stabilizing. Don't celebrate yet, Chen warned. We just taught them that atmosphere loss is a threat. They'll start adapting their defense mechanisms accordingly. She reached a larger junction and pulled out another device, this one looking more like a conventional weapon. I'm approaching engineering now. Be advised, things are about to get loud. Loud? HFY asked. What do you mean by? The rest of the captain's question was drowned out by the sound of Chen's plasma cutter igniting. The tool, originally designed for shipbreaking operations, sent a concentrated stream of superheated plasma through the bulkhead, careful to avoid any vital systems. The parasitic growth recoiled from the heat, creating a clean path through. Commander, Zixtal's voice was even more nervous than usual. Our sensors are showing rapidly increasing biological activity throughout the ship. Whatever you just did, they definitely noticed. Good, Chen replied, stepping through the hole she cut. That means they'll send everything they've got after me, which is exactly what we want. It is. Zixtal didn't sound convinced. Trust me, this isn't my first dance with these things. Chen checked her suit's readings as she entered engineering proper. The massive reactor core dominated the center of the room, its steady hum a sharp contrast to the organic chaos spreading across its housing. Though I have to admit, they've never been this aggressive before, almost like they're angry. A tendril of biological material suddenly whipped toward her face. Chen ducked and rolled, coming up with her plasma cutter already firing. The tendril disintegrated, but two more took its place. They're definitely angry, she amended, dodging another attack. Captain, I'm at the core control panel. Starting emergency override sequence now. Things are about to get very interesting. Define interesting, HFY demanded. Chen smiled grimly as she began the complex sequence of commands that would turn the ship's reactor into a makeshift weapon. Ever wonder what happens when you introduce a quantum uncertainty field into a controlled fusion reaction? That's impossible, Zixtal interrupted. The containment field harmonics would. Only if you're trying to maintain stability, Chen cut him off. We're aiming for the opposite. A carefully controlled instability that'll generate exactly the kind of quantum flux these parasites can't handle. More tendrils were emerging from the walls now, becoming more organized in their attacks. Though we might want to hurry. Our friends here are getting creative. As if to emphasize her point, The biological material began forming into more complex shapes, crude approximations of limbs and appendages. The parasites were trying to create defensive structures on the fly, adapting to each new threat as Chen fought her way to the core. "Commander," Captain Nexixi's voice was tight with tension. "Reactor temperature is approaching critical levels. If we don't stabilize soon." "Don't stabilize," Chen ordered, ducking under a swinging tentacle. "Let it run hot. That's part of the plan." She reached the main control panel, her fingers flying over the alien interface she'd spent months learning to operate. "When I give the signal, I need you to redirect all power to the cargo bay containment fields. Every last bit you can spare." "That would leave us with only emergency power," Zixtal protested. "Basic life support and nothing else." "Better than no life support at all," Chen replied. She finished her input sequence and stepped back, watching as the reactor's glow intensified. "Besides, we only need to survive for about 3 more minutes." A massive tendril, thicker than Chen's torso, suddenly burst from the ceiling. She rolled aside as it slammed into the deck where she'd been standing, leaving a sizable dent in the metal. "Make that 2 minutes," she amended. "They're finally figuring out how to form macro-scale structures. Which means we're almost out of time." She fired her plasma cutter at the base of the tendril, buying herself some space to work. "Captain, on my mark, I need you to." The rest of her instructions were cut off as multiple tendrils struck simultaneously, forcing her into a desperate series of evasive maneuvers. The parasites were learning, coordinating their attacks with increasingly sophisticated patterns. They were evolving right before her eyes, proving once again why they were one of the most dangerous weapons ever created. But that's the thing about weapons, Chen thought as she executed a perfect backward roll to avoid another strike. They usually had fail-safes built in, and she was betting everything that these parasites were no exception. All she had to do was survive long enough to prove it. Captain Nexexi had seen many things in her decades of deep space cargo hauling, but watching a human dance through combat with ever-evolving biological horrors was a new one. Through engineering surveillance feeds, she tracked Commander Chen's movements with a mixture of horror and fascination. "Zixtal," she called to her first officer. "Status of the reactor core." "Temperature continuing to rise, Captain. We're well beyond safety parameters now." His antennae twitched nervously as he studied the readings. "The quantum field fluctuations are. I've never seen anything like this. By all known physics, the reactor should have gone critical 3 minutes ago." "That's because you're trying to apply galactic standard reactor protocols." Chen's voice cut in, slightly breathless as she evaded another attack. "Human ships learned to operate in quantum uncertainty zones during the Proxima Wars. Sometimes the best way to maintain control is to embrace chaos." As if to punctuate her point, a massive surge of energy pulsed through the reactor core, sending cascading waves of blue-white light racing through engineering. The parasitic growth recoiled momentarily, its attacking tendrils wavering. "They felt that," Chen observed, taking advantage of the brief respite to reach another control panel. "Captain, I need you to redirect power to the following grid sections, 7 Alpha through 12 Delta." "Those sections form a ring around the cargo hold," Zixtal noted, pulling up the ship's schematic. "Exactly. We're going to hammer these things between 2 forces, the quantum flux from the reactor and a controlled gravitational collapse from the cargo bay." Chen paused to blast a particularly aggressive tendril with her plasma cutter. "The real question is whether their creators built in the failsafe I think they did." "What failsafe?" Nexixi demanded. "These parasites were engineered as a weapon, right? But whoever made them wasn't stupid. They'd have known that something this adaptable needs an off switch, a way to shut them down if they ever turned against their makers." Chen's voice grew thoughtful. "The way they react to quantum disruption, it's too specific, almost like." She was cut off as a massive section of the ceiling suddenly tore free, revealing a nightmarish network of living architecture. The parasitic growth had evolved beyond simple tendrils, forming complex geometric patterns that pulsed with alien intelligence. "Oh, that's new," Chen muttered. "Captain, we need to move faster. They're achieving metaconsciousness." "They're what?" Zickstall's voice cracked with alarm. "The individual organisms are linking together, forming a distributed neural network. Basically, they're building themselves a giant brain." Chen's tone remained remarkably calm as she worked her way toward the reactor's main control hub. "The good news is this confirms my theory about the failsafe. And the bad news?" Nexexy asked. "They know we know. Look at the growth patterns." The captain studied the feeds more carefully and felt her hemolymph run cold. The parasitic structures were no longer spreading randomly. They were forming concentric rings around engineering, creating layers of defense between Chen and her objective. "They're trying to protect the reactor," Zickstall realized. "They know what we're planning." "Not exactly," Chen corrected. "They know we're planning something involving the reactor, but they don't understand quantum mechanics the way humans do. If they did, they'd be trying to stabilize the core, not just guard it." A new sound filled the ship then, a deep resonant thrumming that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The parasitic growth began pulsing in sync with it, like a massive alien heartbeat. "That would be the metaconsciousness achieving full integration," Chen reported. "Captain, I hope your crew is clear of the lower decks, because things are about to get very interesting." "Define interesting," Nexexy demanded, but she already knew she wouldn't like the answer. "The parasites are going to try to seize control of all ship systems simultaneously. When they do, they'll trigger every emergency protocol in their database, trying to find one that stops us." Chen's voice was tight with concentration as she worked. "The good news is, this proves they're desperate. The bad news is—" The ship's artificial gravity suddenly reversed, sending loose equipment flying toward the ceiling. Emergency bulkheads began cycling randomly, and a life support system started rapidly cycling between different atmospheric compositions. "That," Chen finished. "They're going to do that." Through the chaos, Nexexy watched in amazement as the human continued working, using the erratic gravity shifts to her advantage, bouncing off walls and sliding through gaps in the parasitic defenses that appeared and disappeared with each system malfunction. "Commander," Zickstall called out, "the reactor core is approaching absolute critical. Whatever you're planning." "Almost there," Chen interrupted. "Captain, I need you to lock down all command functions to your station. When I give the signal, enter the following sequence exactly. 7 Echo 9 quantum break." "What will that do?" "Something incredibly stupid that probably violates several laws of physics." Chen reached the reactor's main control panel and began a complex series of inputs. "But if I'm right about the failsafe, it's exactly what we need." The parasitic growth was converging on her position now, forming increasingly complex structures. What had started as simple tendrils had evolved into articulated appendages, moving with terrifying precision. The metaconsciousness was learning, adapting, becoming more sophisticated with each passing second. "Time for a physics lesson," Chen announced, her fingers flying over the controls. "When you create a biological weapon that operates on quantum principles, you need a way to shut it down that can't be evolved around. Something fundamental to the universe itself." She ducked under a swinging appendage without missing a beat. "The answer? Quantum entanglement. These things are all connected at the quantum level. Hit them with the right kind of field, and they all die simultaneously." Nexexy finished, finally understanding. "But generating that kind of field would normally be impossible, yes, unless you have a fusion reactor running in controlled chaos state and a cargo bay designed to contain exotic materials." Chen input the final sequence. "Which, thanks to your incredibly overbuilt ship, we do." "Captain, on my mark, enter that sequence. Zickstall, be ready to vent all atmosphere from engineering. And both of you, pray that I'm right about the failsafe." The parasitic structures had nearly encased her now, forming a living cage of alien geometry. But through the surveillance feeds, Nexexy could see that the human was smiling. "Because if I'm wrong," Chen added almost cheerfully, We're about to tear a hole in spacetime. Ready? The stellar winds shuddered as if in pain, its hull groaning under the strain of competing forces. In engineering, Commander Sarah Chen stood at the heart of an impossible storm, quantum energies from the destabilized reactor core warring with the ever-evolving parasitic structures that threatened to engulf her. "Mark," she shouted, her fingers completing the final sequence. Captain Nexexi didn't hesitate. 7 Echo 9 quantum break, she input, her chitinous fingers moving with precision despite her fear. The ship's computer acknowledged the command with a mournful tone. "Venting atmosphere," Zixtal reported, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. The effect was immediate and spectacular. As the air rushed from engineering, the quantum field generated by the reactor core expanded to fill the vacuum. The parasitic growth writhed in response, its carefully constructed geometric patterns beginning to unravel at the quantum level. "It's working," Chen confirmed, her suit's sensors feeding her real-time data. "The quantum entanglement is cascading through their neural network. They can't adapt fast enough to." She was cut off as one of the larger structures suddenly lunged forward, wrapping around her legs. The parasites might be dying, but their metaconsciousness had apparently decided to take her with them. "Commander," Nexexi called out in alarm. "Minor setback," Chen grunted, trying to free herself. More tendrils were reaching for her now, drawn by her body heat and electrical signals. "Though I could use a little help here." "The reactor core," Zixtal cut in, his antennae twitching as he studied the readings. "The quantum flux is becoming unstable, without atmosphere to help regulate the field." "It'll collapse," Chen finished. "And when it does, the parasites will have about 2 seconds to adapt before the field dissipates completely." She managed to get one leg free, but was still firmly trapped. Not loving these odds, Captain Nexexi studied the tactical display before her, mind racing. The human had risked everything to save their ship, and potentially countless lives beyond it. She couldn't let it end here. "First Officer Zixtal," she commanded, "initiate emergency protocol Theta 7. "Captain." Zixtal's compound eyes widened in surprise. "That protocol is only for—" "Do it. Now." The first officer hesitated only a moment before complying. Throughout engineering, panels in the walls suddenly slid open, revealing rows of emergency chemical sprayers, a last-resort fire suppression system that used exotic compounds normally considered too dangerous for casual use. "Commander Chen," Nexexi called out, "I suggest you close your eyes." "What are you?" Chen started to ask, but she was cut off as jets of silvery liquid began spraying from the walls. The substance ignited on contact with the vacuum, creating chains of chemical reactions that rippled through engineering like lightning. The parasitic growth recoiled violently from the chemical fire, its hold on Chen loosening just enough for her to break free. She pushed off from the nearest wall, using her suit's thrusters to navigate through the chaos toward the reactor controls. "That's buying us time," she reported, "but the quantum field is still collapsing. We need something to stabilize it long enough for the entanglement effect to finish propagating through their network." "What about the cargo bay containment fields?" Zixtal suggested. "If we reverse the polarity, that would create a quantum resonance wave." Chen finished, her tone brightening. "Zixtal, you're a genius. Captain, redirect all remaining power to the cargo bay containment system. And when I say all power, I mean everything. Life support, artificial gravity, everything except the bridge controls themselves. That would leave us running on emergency batteries," Nexexi pointed out. "Better than running from evolved quantum parasites," Chen countered. She reached the reactor controls and began making adjustments. "Besides, if this works, we'll only need about 30 seconds of power." The captain considered for a moment, then made her decision. Redirecting power now. Throughout the ship, systems began shutting down as energy was diverted to the cargo bay. The emergency lighting flickered and died, leaving only the glow of the reactor core and the still-burning chemical fire to illuminate engineering. Quantum field stabilizing, Zixtal reported, his voice tight with concentration. The resonance wave is, by the 3 hives, I've never seen readings like this. That's because your science never needed to account for weapons that operate on quantum principles, Chen explained, her fingers dancing across the controls. Humans learned these tricks the hard way, fighting threats that shouldn't have been possible in the first place. The parasitic structures were changing now, their complex geometries dissolving into simpler forms as the quantum entanglement effect spread through their network. The metaconsciousness was failing, its distributed intelligence fragmenting under the assault of fundamental forces it couldn't adapt to. It's working, Chen confirmed. Their quantum cohesion is breaking down at the base level, once it reaches critical threshold. A massive surge of energy suddenly pulsed through the ship, causing every system to spike simultaneously. The parasitic growth convulsed, its remaining structures twisting into impossible shapes before simply unraveling. In seconds, the entire infection began to disintegrate, breaking down into its component particles, and then even further, until nothing remained but a fine, inert dust. Quantum cohesion failure confirmed, Zixtal reported, his voice filled with wonder. They're just gone. All of them. Not gone, Chen corrected, finally allowing herself to relax slightly. Reduced to their quantum components and locked into a single state. They can't reform or adapt because they can't achieve quantum uncertainty anymore. She patted the reactor control panel affectionately. Your ship just helped us rewrite their fundamental nature. And the failsafe? Nexxi asked. You were right about it. Had to be. Nobody creates a weapon this sophisticated without building in a kill switch. The trick was figuring out what it was. In this case, quantum entanglement combined with state locking. Chen began powering down the emergency protocols. The real question is, who created them in the first place? And why target civilian shipping lanes? Before anyone could respond, a new alarm began blaring through the ship. Zixtal's antennae went rigid as he checked the readings. Captain, he reported, his voice tight with fresh concern, we're picking up multiple ships dropping out of FTL nearby. Their signatures match. They match Proxima Defense Force vessels. The bridge of the stellar winds was eerily quiet as 5 Proxima Defense Force vessels surrounded them, their weapons arrays clearly visible through the main viewport. Captain Nexxi stood with rigid formality, her compound eyes fixed on Commander Chen, who had finally joined them on the bridge. You knew they were coming, Nexxi said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Chen had removed her helmet but still wore the rest of her combat suit, now covered in a fine layer of what remained of the parasitic threat. This wasn't just about saving your ship. It was about proving the defense concept. Defense concept? Zixtal asked from his station. The quantum lockdown procedure we just performed. Until now, it was just theoretical. We needed to prove it would work in real-world conditions. Chen's expression was apologetic, but unapologetic. Your ship was perfect, not just because of its reactor specifications, but because of its crew. Explain, Nexxi demanded, her antennae quivering with barely controlled emotion. We've been tracking these parasitic weapons for months. They've hit dozens of ships, but yours was the first where the crew showed the right combination of traits. Technical expertise, adaptability, and most importantly, the willingness to trust when the situation demanded it. Chen gestured to the surrounding ships. The Proxima Defense Force has been following parallel courses with every ship we identified as potentially infected, waiting to see which crew would help us prove the defense concept was viable. So we were an experiment. Nexxi's voice was cold. No, Chen corrected firmly. You were our best hope for stopping a weapon that could have killed billions. The parasites on your ship weren't the only ones out there. They're just the first we've been able to stop permanently. The main communications array suddenly lit up, indicating an incoming transmission from the lead Proxima vessel. Chen nodded to Nexxi. You should answer that. They'll want to confirm the quantum lockdown was successful. The captain hesitated, then opened the channel. A human face appeared on the main screen. An older man with admiral's insignia. Captain Nexexi. He greeted formally. I'm Admiral Chen of the Proxima Defense Force. I see you've met my daughter. Father. Chen acknowledged with a slight nod. Our sensors confirm complete quantum lockdown of the parasitic organisms, the Admiral continued. Congratulations. You've just helped us validate humanity's first effective defense against these weapons. The data from this operation will help us protect countless lives. And if we had failed? Nexexi asked quietly. Then the Defense Force would have been forced to destroy your ship, Chen answered honestly. We couldn't risk the parasites reaching Proxima II. The colony there has over 10 million civilians. Zixtal's antennae twitched. You would have sacrificed us. No, Admiral Chen cut in. We would have sacrificed my daughter alongside you. Sarah volunteered for this mission, knowing the risks. If the quantum lockdown failed, she would have manually overloaded your reactor core, destroying the ship and everything on it, including herself. A heavy silence fell over the bridge as the implications sank in. Finally, Captain Nexexi spoke again. The other infected ships you mentioned. How many? 17 confirmed cases in the past month alone, Commander Chen replied. All heading toward major population centers. Now that we know the quantum lockdown procedure works, we can begin systematically clearing the shipping lanes. And you need our help, Nexexi guessed. Your ship's reactor configuration is ideal for the procedure, Admiral Chen confirmed. We're prepared to offer significant compensation for your assistance in this operation. But more importantly, we're offering you the chance to help stop whoever is behind these attacks before they can escalate further. Captain Nexexi looked around her bridge. At the fine dust that was all that remained of a threat that had nearly destroyed them, at her first officer who had helped make the impossible possible, and at the human who had risked everything alongside them. The compensation is irrelevant, she declared, but I want something else in exchange for our help. Name it, both Chen said simultaneously. I want the truth, all of it. Who created these weapons, why they're targeting civilian ships, and what humanity really knows about what's coming. Nexexi's compound eyes fixed on Commander Chen. Because this isn't just about protecting shipping lanes, is it? No, Chen admitted. It's not. The parasites are just the first wave. We detected something coming from deep space 6 months ago, something that makes these weapons look primitive by comparison. That's why we needed to perfect the quantum lockdown procedure now before. She trailed off. Before what? Admiral Chen's expression grew grave. Before the main force arrives. Our long-range sensors detected it passing the Oort cloud last week. Whatever created these parasitic weapons, the real threat is still coming. And we need all the allies we can get. Nexexi turned to Zixtal, who nodded firmly. They had already faced death together today. What was one more impossible mission? Very well, the captain declared. The Stellar Winds and her crew are at your disposal. Now, tell us everything. Commander Chen smiled, but there was a weight to it now. It started 3 months ago, when our quantum arrays detected something impossible in the Kuiper Belt, a signal that shouldn't have existed. A pattern in quantum space itself that defied every law of physics we thought we understood. As Chen began explaining humanity's greatest challenge yet, Captain Nexexi reflected that perhaps this was why humans had survived and thrived despite their relatively brief time among the stars. They didn't just face impossible odds. They deliberately sought them out, turned them into advantages, and then invited others to join them in their magnificent insanity. And somehow, they'd made you want to say yes.